Hi there and welcome. This is a wrap on my trip to the Netherlands that I took a couple of months ago. I wanted to share a couple of lessons learned and also to tell you guys how Air France ended up paying for my trip to the Netherlands. If you haven't seen the series of my trip, I'll leave a link up above, so please check it out. I was planning on filming this at the airport a couple of weeks from now as I travel to my next destination, but today something special happened, so I thought I'd go ahead and film today and share it with you. This is Travels with Jimmy, so I'm just not going to sit here on the sofa and talk to you guys. Let's go for a walk. So it snowed. So this is a pretty special day. I live just north of Atlanta, Georgia, and it snows here maybe once every 3 to 4 years. The last time it snowed was right before the pandemic, and I think most people would consider what we got to be a dusting. Last time we had any significant accumulation was in 2014, and it basically shut the city down because it happened in midday, so people were commuting and it was a nightmare. I ended up spending the night at my office that night. But this all happened in the morning. Schools and businesses were closed, announced closures the day before. So everything's pretty well planned out. Looks like some people have actually ventured out on the road. So very special day around here. So what I wanted to share was first, as a vlogger, I film everything in 4K here on my iPhone, and I was under the impression that when I created the movies on iMovie that it would upload in the same resolution, but that's not the case. The default setting for iMovies is probably the worst resolution, which is what my first 4 videos, I believe, were filmed in. And regrettably, nothing I can do about it now. What's done is done. We just need to keep looking forward. And one of the commenters on my videos from the Netherlands pointed out that I wasn't uploading in 1080 or 4K, and I will be doing that in the future, I realized. So you know who you are. Thank you for pointing that out to me. So the second thing is ABS or ABR, always be shooting, always be rolling. I decided to just take the travel day off to return back to Atlanta, so I didn't do any filming. And that's unfortunate because probably one of the most significant things happened, which is what this video is all about. So I arrived at the airport early because I like hanging out at airports. And I was checking out, there's an observation deck that you can look at and see all the airplanes, and there's a KLM airplane you kind of look at. It's kind of cool little setup they've got there. And then I went to the Aspire Lounge at the airport. Highly recommend that. I got in with my priority pass, and definitely recommend that and look forward to going back to the Aspire Lounge next time I'm at the Amsterdam airport. But in any event, I got to the gate and I was sitting there reading my book. And I looked up and I saw my flight was delayed by a half hour. I was flying to Paris first and then flying to Atlanta, and I had a 2-hour layover scheduled for Paris. So I went back reading my book and I looked up, and then I noticed my flight was delayed by an hour. I was a little concerned, but I had 2 hours, so I still had an hour in Paris to get to my flight. And I think you can see where this is going. Next time I looked up from my book, the flight was delayed by an hour and a half. At this point, I went up to the gate. When I got there, there was a Dutch guy talking in Dutch, but I heard him use the word Atlanta, so I figured he's on my flight. We're in the same situation. So when he was done, I went up to the gate agent and I asked, should I be concerned about missing my connecting flight? And in a very Dutch fashion, she said yes, you should. But nothing you could do, so we waited it out. Turns out the flight was delayed by 2 hours. And when I got on the plane, I received a text message from Air France that my flight to Atlanta was also delayed. So I was like, hey, everything's gonna work out. Just be chill. So I arrived in Paris, went through customs, or exited the EU, and arrived at my gate, and it was like a scene out of the movies. Gate was completely empty. Nobody waiting at the gate. No gate attendants, and more importantly, no airplane. So I went back to the Air France desk, and all of the flights that I could find connecting and eventually ending up in Atlanta were all currently boarding, so they couldn't get me on in time. All right, so one of the cool things that happened was I went down to dinner at the hotel, and there was Jay. And we ended up sitting together and having a conversation for about 2.5 hours. We ended up shutting the restaurant down. And we talked about everything. He was traveling to Texas to go to school on an exchange program. And we talked about everything. We talked about Dutch transportation. We talked about Texas barbecue. We talked about politics. We talked about Trump. We talked about guns, drugs, alcohol. The only thing I think we didn't talk about was the weather and religion. But when we left and split up, you know, he said, "Hey, it was really nice talking to you." And I said, "Yeah, man, it was beautiful." And then I got in the elevator and I was like, "It's beautiful? What kind of corny thing what? That's cringy." But when I thought about it, it really was. I mean, here was a guy from the Netherlands in his 20s talking to an American, middle-aged American, just shooting the breeze about everything. Topics that most people don't even talk about, at least in America. And it was beautiful. And it can only happen with travel. So, Jay, if you're watching this, howdy. So this is one of the cool things about my neighborhood is there's a little nature trail I'm gonna take you guys on. All right, so that was fun going down that hill to get here. But this is one of my favorite places to go in the neighborhood and go for walks. This is pretty cool. So in the morning we woke up and caught the hotel shuttle and made our first flight out to Atlanta safe and sound, and everything was great. It's kind of weird when you connect with somebody like that, with an event like that, and then everyone just goes their separate ways. But I really enjoyed my conversation with Jay, and that's really one of the reasons I want to keep traveling, is just to meet and talk to people like that and get to know other cultures. All right, but you guys are probably wanting to know how Air France ended up paying for my trip to the Netherlands. Now, if you watch the series at the end, I kept a budget, and I ended up out of pocket, if I remember correctly, somewhere a little over $350 on the flight, and I was using miles to kind of get that discounted. And then all of my hotel rooms were paid for with points, with the exception of the Moxie and Utrecht, which was a total of a little over $500 out of pocket. That doesn't include eating. This is just for the airfare and hotel. So, one of the things that I was aware of was a law called EU 261. And that is compensation for passengers for flights that are either delayed or canceled. Now, I told the other 4 passengers about it, but at the time I was mistaken, because I thought that only Jay and I would be the only ones entitled to the compensation, in that we had booked our flights through KLM or Air France. The other 3 had booked their flights through Delta, a US carrier. But that's not the case. So with any airplane carrier, and it doesn't matter who you booked your flights through, the determining factor is what airplane are you flying on. So if you're flying on an EU carrier, in this case Air France, any flights to and from the EU fall under the purview of EU 261. However, flights, and this may be confusing, but however, flights to the EU, if you're gonna get compensated, you have to be flying an EU carrier. Those do not apply. So a flight originating outside of the EU is not gonna be covered by EU 261. Now the compensation's as follows. So if you've got a 2-hour plus delay on a flight less than 1,500 kilometers, which is 932 miles, you're entitled to compensation. If your flight is over 3 hours delayed and your flight was more than 1,500 kilometers but less than 3,000 kilometers, which is 1,800 miles, and then all other flights, the delays have to be more than 4 hours. Now, because my delay was 2 hours, I actually didn't think I was going to get it, but it wasn't the flight to Atlanta that counted. It was that flight to Paris, which was under 1,500 kilometers. So when I made it back to my hotel room, I was checking on this and I was Googling it, and I will say this. I came across a couple of websites where it looked like you could file a claim. It looked a little sketchy, a little suspect, so fortunately I didn't do that. The best advice that I read was to file with the airline, because they already have all your information. They know your flight was delayed. They know what flight you were on. All right, so when I got home, I opened up the Air France app. And if you look at the top right corner, you'll see a little, I don't know, caption with a question mark on it. Tap on that and it'll open up where you'll see delayed and canceled flights. And you open that up and that's where you would file your claim. So I filled out the information. Again, they had all my flight information already preloaded, and I made my claim. And I want to say less than 24 hours later, I got an email response asking if I had any additional compensation claims. And at this point I was like, hey, what the heck? I had an extra day of parking at the airport, so I included my receipt for that. And I received an email back in reply that that wouldn't be covered under EU 261, and that I'd have to file a travel insurance claim, which I guess I could have done, but for an additional $14. But then, to my surprise, the following day, I received an email from Air France stating that 600 euros or $660 would be deposited in my checking account within 48 hours. And lo and behold, the next day, it was there. So I got paid $660 because of the flight delay. Now, in the United States, passengers aren't treated like this. However, this fall it was announced that there would be protections added for American passengers at the American air carriers. Whether or not the next presidential administration is going to follow through with that remains to be seen, because it's definitely just going to help consumers. It's not going to help stock prices or corporate profits. So we'll see how that goes. But in any event, so my recommendation is, when you can fly an EU carrier, fly an EU carrier, because you're going to get protected. Man, my phone just died. So I just had to make a second trip back out here after charging it. So that's the story. Hope you guys found this interesting. Stuck around this long, thank you. If you found it informative, please like. And if you'd like to follow along on my next adventures, please subscribe. I greatly appreciate it. So for now, I'm gonna head home, warm up, edit this video, and then make plans for the next destination. For now, all I can say is hasta tiempo próximo. ABS or ABR, always be shooting, always be rolled. Yeah, I just thought of this. In my first Dutch vlog in Utrecht, I was complaining about how hot it was in Atlanta, and now look at this place. Anyhow, thanks for watching. See you soon.